But I have a question for you. I don't want you to tell me, so don't blurt it out, but who is your enemy? Do you have any enemies? When I stopped to think about that, I was kind of struggling a little bit. Other than Satan and his followers, I was trying to think of, who would be my enemy? How could I classify somebody as being against me, my enemy? And I honestly had a hard time coming up with something. You can think about it, you've got competitors. You have people that compete against you at different times in your life. Maybe as you're working, you have somebody that is trying to compete with you as a mutual employee, or maybe a boss, jealousy, or things like that. But can you really say you have anybody who would be an enemy to you? Somebody that was against you? Somebody that desired to hurt you, physically or otherwise? I really struggled trying to think of somebody like that. But Jesus is dealing with that in Luke chapter 6. In verse 27, if you'll read along with me, it says, "But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. And pray for those who mistreat you." And it wasn't until I read the part where it says, "Bless those who curse you," that it suddenly came to my mind. I don't maybe personally have any enemies, but I do have enemies in people who take a different stand on truth, what would be right and wrong. So, for instance, if I take a stand on something that is right or wrong in my mind, based on Scripture, and somebody says, "You're being biased or judgmental against me because I believe in this or do this. I practice this, so therefore you're against me," and I become their enemy. So it started to dawn on me that it might not be as it was during the day when Jesus was writing, when they had people who were literally persecuting them and literally going after them for different things, whether it be to imprison them or to tax them unfairly or to kill them. They were facing persecution that I personally have never faced in my life. There may be a time come that would be something I would face. But for the time being, the enemies that I face today would be someone who would be against what I believe in. So if I take a stand on something like, for instance, abortion or something like that, and then those who would be for that would be taking a stand against me. So those would be those who would consider me their enemy, because they would curse me. They would speak against me, speak evil against me. So reading it from that standpoint, bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. And it started out, do good to those who hate you. Now it's a little different light. Now I begin to think of it as those who are holding a grudge against me, or lobbying against me, or trying to cause the world to accept sin as being right. And then, in doing so, make it legal to do things that are against God's word. And they are my enemies. So when I speak up, when I voice my opinion or voice what God says in His word as law, then I would receive that hate, that evil or cursing against me. So think about it from that standpoint, and then how do you love somebody that's doing that? How do you pray for somebody who is wanting to damage you? How do you bless someone who is cursing you? And Jesus goes on. He says, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. do to others as you would have them do to you. That would be really hard for me. if we physically had to do that. I have never had, let me think about that before I say that, if I ever had anyone strike me because I'm their enemy. I can't think. I've had scuffles as a youngster and things like that, but I can't think of a time when someone was mad at me and hit me. But if they did, what would it be like to turn the other cheek to them? How would they respond to that? And probably match the mark on the other side or whatever. But how can you do that? That would be asking a lot, wouldn't it? If you had to take someone who had stolen from you, this is one that really gets me because it really bothers me when people steal things from me. I feel violated. Yeah, that's the word. I feel violated because it's just like that was mine and they took it. And it doesn't even have to be that big a deal. But then to say, okay, yeah, not only that, but here, take this too. I heard of a story. A lady in the shopping mall had come out and was getting in her car and was loading stuff into her car. And a guy came up behind her and stuck something in her back and said, give me all your money. And so she happened to have her wallet in her hand there, and he took it away from her and emptied her wallet out. And she said, you missed some. There's some in the other compartment there too that I hide there. And he's like, why would you do that? Why would you tell me that? And she said, because it's not my money. And he said, what do you mean? And she said, it's God's money. Everything I have is God's. And so you're not taking it from me, you're taking it from God. Well, he threw the whole wallet and everything down and ran off. I don't know if that would work or not, but I'm willing to try it if somebody does that to me. But it's that, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, you turn to them the other. How can you do that? That's what Jesus is asking you to do. But then in verse 32, he says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. I was thinking about that part, and I've made it a principle in my life that whenever someone asks me to borrow money, I don't keep a record of it. I give it to them with the idea if you can pay me back, great. But if not, it's a gift. And I don't have that much to loan, so don't come to me asking for money. But if I did have a little bit of money and was able to loan you the money, that has been my policy. And the reason is because of that very scripture. Because I've thought about it a lot of times, and there was a minister who shared with me one time that if you give with the expectation of someone paying you back, then that is something that you have an expectation upon them that will put a strain on that relationship. Now, when we're talking about in the world and you're buying and selling houses or cars or whatever, you're borrowing, and that's a whole different story. But I'm talking about brother to brother, sister to sister, loaning money and helping one another out. When we do that with the expectation that I'm going to loan that to you as a gift, that if you can pay it back, then I can have that to give to someone else or to do something else with. But otherwise, it's a gift. And then there's no feelings of frustration or anger or being disappointed if they don't, because in my mind, it's a gift. I don't know if that would work for everyone, but it has worked for me, and I feel like I have been blessed to have that opportunity more than once to do that. And you know what? I can't think of a single, not that I would remember, because like I said, I loan it and then it's gone, so I don't think about it, but I don't think anybody has ever not paid it back. But But the idea that, but we love our enemies. We care about those. So there's one more facet of this that is even harder. What if someone has wronged you to the point of taking someone from you, or causing someone that you love to be separated from you in some way, to be imprisoned or killed, or something like that? How can you love someone like that? How can you love somebody that has done something so bad to you? What if someone has violated you physically? How do you love somebody like that? Those are hard questions. Very difficult questions, because what you're basically saying is I hold nothing against you. That doesn't mean that there isn't consequences to pay. And that doesn't mean that we just ignore the things that have happened. But can you honestly love someone who cares, who didn't care enough about you to preserve a life, or to help someone who is in hurting? Can you love someone who hasn't treated you well? When he ended that last part in verse 35, but love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get back anything. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. Last week we were talking about rewards and how there are three different things that motivate people. We're motivated by fear, we're motivated by rewards, and we're motivated by love. Fear is a very temporary thing, because we either get to the point where we overcome that fear, or we accept it and go on. But the rewards are something that's always a carrot in front of you, something that you're always looking forward to. You get that one, you get another reward. You keep going, you build on those rewards. But yet it's still temporary, because once you get it, you work towards something, and once you get it, then it's like, oh, okay, I got that. Now what else? And so it's not fulfilled. But love is the best motivator of all, because love is eternal. Love is God, and God is love. And so when we love one another, when we care about something, when we are motivated by love, it goes on. In these verses that he was just talking about, he says the reward will be greater. What reward? We'll read on, and he says, and you will be sons of the Most High. The reward that he's talking about is not a physical reward. The reward is that we will be sons of God. And he goes on and he says, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. His idea is that we would love one another. We would love those who are against us. We would love those who hate us. We would even love those who would curse us. Why? Because then we're being like him. We are loving out of a true concern, a desire for someone to know him, to have a relationship with him. We want to invite them to be children of the Father as well. And that's the whole purpose of what Jesus is doing here in these verses, is encouraging us to be like God. Because when we act like God, I hesitate every time I say that, be like God, because in today's world, there's a lot of people that believe that you can be God, that you can be a God. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is to be like God, and in the things that he does, and the love that he has. And I'd like to read the next few verses, because it connects with the previous ones. In verse 37, it says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. He kind of sums it all up right there. That when we are willing to forgive others, God's forgiveness can truly reach us. I want to tell you something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with over the years. Because how can I forgive somebody that's done something so wrong to me? And then when we say we forgive someone, a lot of times what it is, okay, I'm not going to hold it against you, but just stay away from me. Just you be you, I'll be me, and just forget about it. But is that really forgiveness when we do that? Is that really forgiveness when we put barriers up between us? Sometimes there's things we have to do to protect ourselves or others. I understand that. But the forgiveness that God is talking about is from our heart to the point where we can say, I want you to know Jesus. I want you to have a relationship with God that I have. That's the point where we say, I'm not holding it against you. I'm not going to burden you with my anger, my bitterness, because what we're really doing is doing that to ourselves. What he's saying is when we are willing to forgive others, then we can truly enjoy the forgiveness that God gives us. When we are willing to release someone that we have held bitterness against, then we truly are able to enjoy that no bitterness in our heart, in our bones. It says that bitterness causes the rotting of our bones. And I don't believe that that's just a matter of speaking. I honestly believe that when we hold bitterness in our hearts, that we are doing physical damage to our body. That we can cause ourselves physical damage when we hold on to bitterness and anger and stress. That causes us problems in ourselves. So letting go of those things, we get to enjoy it. But a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will pour into our lap when we are willing to love those who hate us. When we're willing to give those who are taking from us. Last week we talked about Zacchaeus and how he was a tax collector and how nobody liked the tax collectors. We still don't like the tax collectors today, but it's a little different situation. We don't have somebody that's trying to take advantage of us, to steal from us. Well, maybe that's never mind. But what I mean is they're not trying to get beyond what the taxes that we're owed. But imagine your fellow countrymen coming to you, representing the very people that are taxing you, and not only taking the tax, but then adding to it, maybe even doubling the tax, so that they would be able to enjoy that. And if you resist or go against them, then you're in trouble. How would you be able to forgive somebody like that? How could you pray for that person to give without feelings of anger, frustration, and bitterness towards them? I believe that when we surrender all things to God and we allow Him to be in control, we can do just that. In verse 39, he tells a parable. He also told them this parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into the pit? A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. I was listening to a preacher this last week who was talking about that last little part there. And he was talking about the speck. And you think about that and you see a speck in your brother's eye. And he was saying, no, that's not a speck. When I'm looking at my brother's eye, he's the one that's got the log in his eye. I've got the speck. But that's not a speck in his eye, that's a log. And he began to describe some different things that we hold against one another. And it made me think about the fact that sometimes when we're looking at ourselves in the mirror, we don't see that log sticking out of our eye. Maybe it's because of the log itself. Maybe we have a blind spot. But he started off, and the blind cannot lead the blind, or they'll both fall into a pit. What we want is the clear vision. How do we get that? How do we get that clear vision? I believe that it does take each other. It does take one another helping each other to see our blind spots, to recognize the things that we need to change. I would like to invite you to tell me when I have a blind spot, but be very gentle, okay? Let me know ahead of time. This is a blind spot I see. But I think we need to encourage one another and to help one another to see the needs that they have, but also to see the things that might be hindering them from being all that God called them to be. As we look at the idea of loving our enemies and caring for those, to be able to picture in your mind your enemy, to be able to picture in the mind when I first asked you, who is your enemy? To be able to picture them and say, how can I show them love? How can I give of myself to help them see God as a loving, kind, giving, forgiving, loving God? How can I portray that to them? I think that's what Jesus is asking them to do. And he's asking us to do that too. How can we be the example of who God is to us?